Hello, everybody, and welcome to the February edition of the Watch Club. February, I can say that, edition of the Watch Club. We are the monthly filmmaker interview series of the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival. I am program director James Sullivan, and we are brought to you, as always, by the Ford Hall Forum, which is the longest continually operating public lecture series in the country, based here in Boston. So we thank them, as always, for helping us bring you this programming. We're here tonight to talk about a great new documentary that just premiered on PBS's Independent Lens series. It is called The Strike, and it is about a historic strike that took place at the Pelican Bay Correction Facility in Northern California, and then spread to facilities across the state about 10 or so years ago now. Filmmaker Lucas Gilkey is with us tonight. He co-directed the film with his partner Joe Bill Munoz, and Lucas is going to join us in a minute to talk about the making of this powerful film. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it yet, we're just going to ask producer Steve to roll the trailer so that you get a sense of what the film is about.
Imagine reaching a point where your memories start to fade and you have no way of creating new ones.
Being subjected to long-term sensory deprivation.
We were placed in solitary confinement for decades.
Folks inside started thinking about ways to protest.
Let's do a nonviolent act. Let's do a hunger strike.
Lucas Gilkey, welcome to the Watch Club.
Thank you so much for having me, James. Very happy to be here.
Glad to have you. It is a really intense film. And actually, people might think, that we got a lot of heavy stuff going on in the news right now, and people might think this is yet another heavy story. It actually ends pretty sweetly, but I'm not going to give that away. But it does.
I appreciate that, though, because people are surprised that they can feel inspired and uplifted at the end of this film.
Yes, that's exactly. Well, that's kind of my point. Yes. So just so you know, if you haven't watched it yet and you're worried about bringing, some more heaviness into your life, there's actually quite a bit of uplift in this film. So why don't we start with the basics, Lucas? You started to tell me a few minutes ago, but I would love to hear about so you and Joe Bill went to journalism school together, right? A documentary film studies school at Berkeley?
Yes, that is correct. That's how we met and formed this creative partnership that ultimately led to this film.
So was your partnership at school, did you become friends while you were in the program together and then develop, how did you develop this project in particular? Did it come out of a classroom assignment?
Yeah, great question. This project has been a labor of love over many years. Basically, we met in journalism school, and we both worked on various documentary films and have a journalism background. We actually worked on each other's thesis films in grad school. I made a film about a young man who died in county jail and his mother's search for truth and justice. Joe Bill supported me a lot on that film. Joe Bill was working on a film about Central American men in immigration limbo in Mexico on their way to the U.S. I supported him a lot on that film. And so we really came together to develop this idea. This is an idea that I had for a long time, actually, since the time of the hunger strikes in 2011, 2013. I had been following them closely, been shooting a little bit on my DSLR camera, spending a lot of time actually with the family members of the hunger strikers who were becoming active voices of their loved ones in indefinite solitary confinement on hunger strike, and always knew this should be a feature documentary. But it became a long and winding journey, as many documentaries are. And so when Joe Bill and I teamed up, several years later, we really just hit the ground running, started to do all the reporting and production and everything that we needed to do to make, this independent documentary come to fruition.
Right. So you saw, sort of the news reports. It was a pretty big story in California at the time, right? The hunger strike, plural.
Yeah, it kind of catapulted into the headlines. It was receiving international coverage at one point, but it didn't last for that long. And we never really got to hear the full inside perspective. Folks could write from solitary confinement. So there were letters and newsletters. but we never fully, who are the humans like involved
Yeah.
in this? What is the full context and history? And that's always, why we set out to make the documentary.
So you said that your thesis project at Berkeley, yours was about an incarcerated individual, right? Can you tell me why you're drawn to these stories in particular?
Yeah, I'm interested in questions around justice in society. And I think of Michelle Alexander, one of our great public
Mhm.
intellectuals, saying that the incarceration system is one of the great civil rights issues of our time, even though
Mhm.
it's not always understood
Yeah.
as that. Um, and then I'm also, really interested in social movements. And
Mhm.
so this film is about both. It's about
Yeah.
our incarceration system, but it's also about social movements. How do
Mhm.
they happen? How does social change happen? And so it's just a very fruitful story to explore.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, like, so yes, it is about the. Well, let's explain a little further about what it's about. So the prisoners are they're um, many of them have been indefinitely thrown into solitary confinement, and some of them have been in for years, right, if not decades, right, indefinitely. Whereas you point out at some point in the film that the UN's guideline is that no one should be in solitary confinement for more than 15 days at a stint, right?
Exactly.
Um, so in the film, we find that uh, the inmates decide that they have no leverage, no power to negotiate any of the things that the frankly rather sort of minor things that they're asking for, right? Like better, well, less solitary, but also sort of more visiting rights. There's a list of five. You want to go through the five things that they.
Yeah, yeah. There were ultimately five core demands centering around, the fact that this indefinite solitary confinement is unjust.
Yeah.
But it included other aspects of this system, such as like we want basic food.
Hmm.
Uh, we we don't want the only way to be getting out of solitary confinement is to become an informant.
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
fact, that is like illegal under international law. We don't
Hmm.
want group punishment, where
Right.
like if one person does something, the whole group, which was very race based, as you will learn in the
Right.
film,
Right.
is punished.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so they were very clear with all of their demands and consistent throughout, as you said, the multiple hunger strikes. And I
Right.
think that was an effective tactic.
Right. So it was not surprising when I first started watching the film that, to me anyway, that someone in the group learned about Bobby Sands, who was the IRA hunger strike, the individual who led the hunger strike in Ireland in the 1980s, and eventually died on his hunger strike. And it wasn't surprising to me that they found the story. Somebody found the story of him, right, and said, "Well, here's something that we can do. This is the only bit of leverage that we have with the correction system." To say, if you don't want us to die on your watch, you might want to talk to us about a few of these things that we're asking for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of consciousness raising that happened in these solitary units
Hmm.
around that time. A lot of political development, a lot of
Hmm.
reading, a lot of discussion that, the little discussion that could be had, yelling to your person in a cell next to you. Um, and yeah, it was reading about the history of the US, about the history of radical movements,
Right.
Thomas Paine, George Jackson, Bobby Sands,
Hmm.
the United Farm Workers, and there was a consciousness that was developing, and Bobby Sands was an important touchstone in that,
Hmm.
and specifically around the idea of the hunger strike. And there had been smaller hunger strikes. They're not a completely uncommon, occurrence inside prison,
Hmm.
but no one really expected it to catch fire the way that it did,
Hmm.
even those who originally called for it.
Hmm. I'm going to take a second to say that those of you who are watching live, if you would like to ask Lucas a question, all you have to do is type it into the chat. So please do that. And if we get a chance, I will pose the question to Lucas. Okay. So uh, tell me, if you can, how you first contacted. There's a few figures who have since, I think, been released from prison in the 10 or so years since they began the hunger strike, who have been joining you at film festivals to screen the film, right? Who was the first contact that you made? Was that person already on the outside by the time you said, we're thinking about making a film about the hunger strike and a retrospective look at it?
Yeah.
Was it Jack or was it somebody else?
I think it was Jack. Yeah. I mean, there was a handful of folks who we were connecting with, and it wasn't immediately straight to being on camera,
Yeah,
right? So like
right.
like I said, I had been following previously some of the family members who were organizing on behalf of their loved ones, who I, as a documentary filmmaker, had the easiest access to originally. So I got to know Dolores Canales, who's in the film, who's a family member organizer. And so through her and other folks, yes, we were well positioned as folks got released. And out of folks in the film, yeah, Jack was one of the ones to be first to be released. So we got to connect with him. I remember filming his early morning routine. He was still very much on his very high discipline schedule,
right.
waking up around 3 or 4 in the morning, exercising, living at his mom's house.
And Dolores is the activist whose son was incarcerated, and
Correct.
she sort of helped organize protests outside the prisons. I forget, it was specifically about solitary.
Specifically around the hunger strikes, yes.
Yeah.
And agitating around the hunger
Right.
strikes, saying, our loved ones have been erased from society, essentially. We are their voices.
Right.
And many were becoming politically active for the first time. A lot of, especially women, mothers, wives,
Right.
daughters, aunts, etc. Dolores was a huge part of that.
Right. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, or pose this to you. I'm sure this has come up at screenings. There's probably always someone in the crowd who wants to say, why do these guys deserve rights? They did what they did. And, why should that, why can't society has decided that they owe however many, 35 years or whatever that they're going to serve. Why can't we throw away the key? You've heard that before, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. And what a lot of folks will tell you is, like, we were not sentenced in the court of law to indefinite solitary confinement.
Right.
And these are two separate things,
Yes.
right? So you're sentenced to prison. That's one thing. And then once you're in prison, it's almost an extra legal system with very few checks and balances.
Right.
But once you're in prison, the SHU, the security housing unit, the solitary unit, is essentially the prison within a prison. And so at the time, how would you be sent to the SHU? There were two parallel reasons. One was you break a prison rule, you could end up in the SHU for a determinate amount of time, whether that's a number of months or a number of years. Yep. There's an entirely parallel system where you could end up in there indefinitely, based on having a label attached to you.
Right.
And so the label is prison gang. If you are a member or any type of associate with the prison gang, if you are deemed to be associated with the prison gang in the eyes of the prison system, then there's grounds to hold you indefinitely. And it's a system that's ripe for abuse, right? Because it's so easy to associate someone and there's almost no way out. And it doesn't have to do with your original crime for why you're in prison. And so I think that's really what the hunger strike brought to the fore, and what the film is about.
And that's something that you expose in the film, that what did you call it? Extracurricular, extra legal process of deciding who gets put into solitary. You make it pretty clear that the rules that were enforced, and there's guys who used to be corrections officers, right, who are on camera with you saying, what, some of them started to realize this isn't right. Like, just because somebody has a tattoo that seems sketchy to us or whatever, right?
He speaks very compellingly about attempts within the system to change, and how that went nowhere. He said he wrote a report and it went straight onto a shelf.
Right. Yes. You have screened the film in some fascinating places, obviously at film festivals, and you were telling me also at a lot of law schools. So tell us a little bit about the San Quentin Film Festival, if you can.
Yeah, it probably was our most powerful screening thus far.
Yeah.
This was the inaugural San Quentin Film Festival. To the best of my knowledge, the first time a festival was ever held inside of a prison in the U.S.
Wasn't this just a year or two ago? Or a year ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. That could be wrong, but that's what I heard. It was the first one at San Quentin. I know that, and it was organized by people who have been recently released and who are still currently incarcerated because there's strong media programs in San Quentin. So
Yeah.
it
Oh,
was
wow.
to show off the work of the currently incarcerated people there, the short films they're making, bringing industry folks, and then also having other films there. And we were really honored that our film was chosen as the best documentary by the inside jury of folks who are currently incarcerated there for how well it spoke to their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as a filmmaker, that's a huge honor. The gentleman who's a journalist who's incarcerated there introduced our film and said, you know, we chose this film because it resonated so well with us, and raise your hand if you've been in solitary.
Yeah.
And we had over 100 people there incarcerated in the audience. So many people raised their hands.
Yeah.
And you know, this is a powerful and important story specifically for the California prison system. It resonates everywhere, but specifically the change that it created in California.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really, really powerful to witness that in real time and get to talk to a lot of these guys there.
So those guys have access to cameras inside at San Quentin to make the filmmakers?
Yeah. And I should contextualize this with San Quentin is extremely minimum security. This is not the norm. San Quentin used to be the end of the line prison in California, and
I didn't realize that it's minimum now and it was maximum prior, right?
Yeah. It's kind of known for being the supermax of California, but now it's very minimum. Same with Pelican Bay. Pelican Bay basically replaced San Quentin being the end of the line California prison until the hunger strikes caused such massive change. But San Quentin is now very minimum security. But yes, for the folks there, they do have great programming. It's in the Bay Area, so there's a lot of volunteers that come in, and they have great media and journalism programs there. So yeah, there was a great film that a man, his name is escaping me, made about compassionate release and what that whole process is like. You know, from his first person perspective, that was really powerful.
Right. And it means that, you know, that someone who's older for among the older population and is not doing well health-wise anymore. Right. That's what compassionate release is, right?
Yeah. And trying to get released. And it's a struggle. In fact, there's a hunger striker who we're hoping would play a role in the film who was trying to get compassionate release for years after he had a stroke. And he was not able to for years until the law was changed. So yeah, that's an ongoing issue.
Can you give us some idea about access to Pelican Bay? So you explain in the film that Pelican Bay was designed to be a supermax and to basically, be able to handle hundreds of guys in solitary, right? Among other things. Can you tell us a little bit about the access that you got there? I mean, so obviously you can't be filming in prison. Some of the individuals have subsequently, since the hunger strike, as we mentioned earlier, gotten out, finished their time and gotten out. So you're able to talk to them on the outside. But there's some recreations of, guys getting walked into cells and stuff like that. I assume all those interior shots, in fact, there's a little bit of that in the trailer, were actually at Pelican Bay. Did you get access just for those sort of atmospheric shots that without current inmates in the shots?
Yeah, the quick answer is yes, at the 11th hour, at the very end of the process.
Wow. Okay.
But to get there, it was a journey, and I feel like it was a journey to convince folks for a number of years that this could even be a documentary, because we kept getting asked, how are you going to tell this story visually?
Right.
And I think we always had faith, but it was a challenge to figure out how to do that. At one point early in the process, we did experiment with animation. And I think sometimes animation is amazing in documentaries, but for us, it was not working. It was not hitting. The tone was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it works sometimes, and it doesn't work sometimes. This is not the film to do it. Try it with. Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, but we did. 6, 7, 8 years, whenever it was. Like, we tried it. It was one of the many things we tried along the way. So yeah, this film did not rely on access, which I think is an important point. But it was a question of how are we going to weave together all these elements? But over time, it did come together. So we went to the California State Archives and found archival footage from inside the shoe. We did our recreations. That was also at the 11th hour, I should say. We wanted to have the edit down to know, because we had to be very efficient with our time and resources. So we wanted to know exactly. We always had ideas of what we needed, but we wanted to know exactly what we needed, and we worked with a great team to build a replica cell that was pretty true to life, but still stylistic enough that we know it's different. And then, at the end of the process, we did finally gain access to Pelican Bay Shoe because the hunger strikes had such a significant impact, not to give it away to your viewers who haven't seen it, but it did have a very significant impact. It's a radically different place today. We would
Yeah.
never have gotten access during the time of the hunger strike itself.
Right. Here's a question you probably get a lot. I mentioned to you earlier, I'll mention this briefly. One of the reasons why I was excited to speak with you guys about this film is that I'm teaching this semester, teaching journalism in prison here in Massachusetts. The question that I always get at when people say, "Oh, wow, how's that going?" They always want to know if I know what my students did to get, committed to prison. And I kind of feel like it's none of my business. Do you guys feel, did you guys you probably get asked that a lot. Like, what did these guys do to get incarcerated? Right. And
it's a great question. It's a multifaceted question, and it is a really commonly asked question. And I think it's smart to interrogate why it's always the number one question asked, because we need to be able to have these conversations around the prison system, unpacking what it is and who these individuals are without always going there. So I'm in agreement on that. There's a strong ethic in the formerly incarcerated community, which, has been doing a lot of organizing over the past years, decade, especially around, I am not defined by my worst mistake.
Right.
Being a universal value that we can apply to all of us. We should not be defined by our worst mistake.
Right.
And I think that's powerful because in prison, you'll often find people who have done more serious emotional, mental, physical, spiritual work on themselves than folks on the outside, and have been doing some very profound work. And so to just hone in on the commitment crime just creates this vision that is full of stereotypes and assumptions around individuals that is ultimately not helpful. As a journalist, though, you in telling this story, for example, like we did tell the commitment crime of Jack in the film. We felt that was important, even though, as I said earlier, that has nothing to do with really what the film is about, which is this regime of indefinite solitary confinement.
Right.
But we felt, in order to get to know him and his life journey, his life trajectory, we treated it with context and care, but it is a significant violent crime at the same time. So,
but he's super remorseful and, regrets what he did and doesn't apologize for it. I mean, he knows what he did, and served his time, did his time. Right.
Exactly.
Steve, do we have a question from someone or do you, oh, there we go. Okay, great. Sox fan 3414 says, could Lucas talk a little bit about the process of going through archival footage and selecting it for the film? There's a lot of really good footage in the film. I was going to say the same thing. Like, although you're not obviously filming inside Pelican Bay live for any of the film, you can feel the intensity of what it's like behind bars, both with the recreations, the, sort of atmospheric shots that I mentioned earlier, and for sure about the archival footage.
Yeah, no, we're proud of that. I appreciate you mentioning, like, it's a historical story. It's recent history, but it is a historical story. But we're proud that audiences have told us, oh, it feels like I'm there in real time.
Yeah.
So we went into the California State Archives, got some footage of Pelican Bay. That was nice texture to work with. We found the dedication ceremony to Pelican Bay, which was really interesting to us. The governor's there, the head of the Corrections Officers Union is there. There's a lot of pride around it. So that was a really interesting historical artifact. And then, the most amazing probably surprise was the confidential footage of the negotiations between the number 2 in the department and then 4 of the hunger strike representatives. These were meetings we were aware of, had heard a lot about, but never expected to be on camera and never expected to obtain that. So that was pretty amazing. And I think that really, in the film, we spend a lot of time giving the context, but that brings you right into the moment, both sides of the table, discussing this issue in real time. And we kind of just let that footage play. And it's quite compelling.
Did you get pushback from the department about using that footage or no?
We have not thus far.
Yeah. Right. Here's another question. Okay. Solid behind blue eyes. Oh, PBSP hunger strike. Okay. How do you feel about the attorneys and courts abandoning the Ashker settlement? You're going to have to explain the Ashker settlement to me.
Yes. So the Ashker case is the class action lawsuit that happened in tandem with the hunger strike.
Okay.
It was originally handwritten lawsuit filed by Todd Ashker. After the first hunger strike in 2011, they partnered with the Center for Constitutional Rights, and it became this massive class action lawsuit that was ultimately what, coming off the heels of the hunger strike, created the change on how solitary confinement is used in California prisons in 2015, and resulted in thousands of people being released from this regime of indefinite solitary confinement. So it was a very important part of the process. As one of the former prison officials says in the film, you know, I was trying to make change for years, but the only thing that forces change in this department is lawsuits. And so the lawsuit has been under a monitoring period for the last few years, since 2015. And there's a lot of ongoing issues that are tied to the original reasons that the hunger strike and the lawsuit happened, which is people are still in solitary-like conditions. Confidential information that was used in these gang validations is still being used for various things punitively and to deny people parole. And there are other issues as well. And so this is a specific question, but I just want to answer the person's question. Those are very much ongoing issues. And I know there was a desire amongst the attorneys to keep the oversight going, and it was appealed to the appellate courts, and it was denied. I'm not enough of an expert to speak about it further than that at this time.
Yeah. All right. So really appreciate you spending the time to talk to us about your film. Last question for you. This is more of a general question. So we see all kinds of documentaries about all kinds of social justice issues, all kinds of social movements, and obviously documentaries about none of that. But your film is an example of the kind of documentary work, and you both trained as journalists, that really makes a difference in the world, right? So yes, you're telling a story about a recent, the recent history, recent past. This thing already happened before you started making the film, but I would imagine that as you're showing it in law schools and behind bars, you can tell that the film is making a difference or changing some people's minds about the incarcerated population. So the question is, I guess, the question is a statement. You guys must feel pretty good about, the work that you did on this film and the fact that it might, hopefully is having an impact.
Yeah, no, totally. And we've been having amazing community screenings all over the country. I've been hearing feedback in real time. And it's also resonated a lot with people who are formerly incarcerated. It's a significant moment in history, but it also is an evergreen story in terms of, right? It's about organizing. It's about organizing across historical divisions. It's about coalition building. It's about discipline. It's about having hope when there is none. And it's, all these things that we can apply to our world today now more than ever. Quite dire circumstances.
Thank you for pointing that out, because yes, that is one of the takeaways at the end of the film. We definitely appreciate the exposure. The movie was intensely powerful. Absolutely, I agree.
Thank you.
But yes, I mean, I think that is definitely one. Whether or not you're, sort of personally invested in the prison system, or have friends or family, who are behind bars, just the organizing piece itself from this film can be applied in so many other ways, just as you said much more concisely than I did, Lucas. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it. Best of luck with the future of the film, and we look forward to seeing. Are you guys working on your next film together, or no, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I think we're still figuring out next steps and really working on the film's impact campaign, bringing it all around the country. And Yeah, thank you so much for having us, James. We hope folks have been able to watch it. And if they haven't yet, that they tune into PBS. It's on the PBS YouTube channel right now.
Streaming on you. We've been telling people you can definitely still watch it on the PBS website. So on the Independent Lens website. Thanks again, Lucas. Have a great night, and we'll hope to talk to you again sometime soon. We're just going to take a quick minute to thank once again our sponsor, Ford Hall Forum, and we'll see you next month in the Watch Club.